Halberd University was never built for someone like Camden Hill. Not for a quiet black kid from the South Side, walking into marble lecture halls with a hoodie over his head and a scholarship they didn't think he deserved. He wasn't legacy, wasn't connected, didn't come from prep school or private tutors, but what he had was fire. Not the kind that burned loud, the kind that burned smart, the kind that could outthink, outlast, and outwork anyone in the room. Still, from the moment Camden stepped foot on campus, he wasn't treated like a peer. He was treated like a problem, a statistic wrapped in cotton fleece, a symbol, not a student. They whispered that he was an equity pick. They mocked his silence. They waited for him to fail. And when he didn't, they edited him, cut up his lectures, turned his greatest academic moment into a meme, passed it around like a joke with captions like, "Hoodie tries to math, fails publicly." And the worst part, no one stopped it. Not the professors, not the deans, not the system that claimed to protect students like him. Because the truth is, systems don't protect what they don't expect to succeed. But Camden, he wasn't built to be expected. He was built to be exceptional. This is the story of how one quiet black student, armed with nothing but his mind, his silence, and a red notebook, exposed the cracks in one of America's elite institutions. How he turned humiliation into documentation. How he made them choke on their own edited narratives by showing up again and again and again with the one thing they couldn't deny: proof. This is not a story about revenge. It's a story about resilience, about how you don't have to yell to be heard. You just have to stay standing long enough for the silence to become louder than their noise. Camden Hill never fought back with fists. He fought back with facts. He didn't demand they see him. He forced them to see themselves. And when the dust settled after the hearings, the suspensions, the headlines, he didn't gloat. He walked through the same halls that once mocked him, under the same statue that once symbolized his exclusion, and past a new generation of students who would now have space to breathe because he refused to break. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told to just stay quiet and be grateful, if you've ever worn a hoodie and felt like it made you a target, this story is for you. And trust me, you'll never look at silence the same again. Camden Hill walked through the polished glass doors of Halberd University like he didn't belong. And maybe in some people's eyes, he didn't. A gray hoodie pulled low over his forehead, noise-canceling headphones draped around his neck, a spiral notebook clutched tight in his hand like armor. He didn't talk. He didn't make eye contact. He just moved. The halls of Halberd's Math and Physical Sciences building were always humming with energy, buzzing with the nervous pride of students who believed they were the best of the best. Legacy kids with last names on library walls. Whiz kid prodigies from magnet schools in Silicon Valley. Students who dropped MIT's name like a middle name and wore Ivy League rejections like scars. Camden said nothing to any of them. Room 3B was already half full by the time he slipped into the last row. He chose the corner seat, always the corner. Hoodie up, eyes low, his fingers spun a pencil with rhythmic precision, faster than the eye could follow, like they were keeping tempo with something only he could hear. Nobody noticed him. Correction, nobody wanted to. Because in that kind of classroom, silence plus hoodie plus black skin added up to one thing: invisibility, or worse, suspicion. Camden wasn't surprised. Halberd's math department was brutal, competitive, elite, and overwhelmingly white. A space not made for kids like him. Not really. Affirmative action brochures said otherwise, sure. But reality? Reality lived in the sideways glances, the hushed whispers, the smug smiles when he introduced himself on the first day. He could hear them even now. He's in the wrong major. Probably got in because of DEI quotas. I mean, he doesn't look like someone who made a 1590 suey. Camden let it slide. Letting it slide was a skill, same as vector calculus, same as silence. But silence didn't mean weakness. Not with Camden. He'd grown up in the east end of Cleveland, in a two-bedroom apartment with a leaking ceiling and a mother who worked two jobs and a night shift. He learned early how to disappear in plain sight, how to blend, to move, to calculate threats like equations. That hoodie, it wasn't rebellion. It was armor. The lecture hall buzzed louder now. It was Tuesday, and Tuesday meant McAllister. Professor Daniel McAllister, legendary in the department. Former MIT visiting fellow at Cambridge, and known across campus as the butcher of freshmen. Sharp suits, sharper tongue. Rumor had it he once told a sophomore to change majors in front of 200 people because you do math like a poet with a hangover. He didn't believe in coddling, especially not students like Camden. Camden had seen it, the way McAllister's eyes swept the room every Tuesday, how he paused just a second longer when they landed on the last row, that amused smirk that always curled on his lips when he saw Camden sitting there, quiet, hoodie up, fingers spinning that pencil like a metronome, like a dare. The room shifted suddenly, chairs squeaked, notebooks opened. The chatter died in waves. McAllister had entered. A hush fell like clockwork. Authority wrapped in tailored tweed and biting intellect took his place at the front of the room. He didn't speak for the first few seconds, just stared at the class like he was scanning for defects. Then he smiled, the kind of smile that made people nervous. "Let's begin," he said sharply, chalk already in his hand. The board came to life. Partial derivatives, Laplace transforms, integral domains. He didn't ease in, he never did. Students scrambled to copy, but Camden, he just watched, pencil still spinning, because for him this was the easy part. What came next, the glances, the assumptions, the whispered comments behind his back, that was the real math test, the one he had to solve every day. And he always did. Camden didn't take notes like the others. While they furiously scribbled every equation like their grades depended on it, because, well, they did, Camden just sat there, watching, studying, letting the numbers hang in the air like musical notes waiting to resolve. It wasn't arrogance. It was trust. Trust in his mind, in his memory, in the way he could take a complex transform and visualize it like a puzzle clicking into place. The board was filled with recursive functions and inverse mappings, but in Camden's head, they were pictures, fluid, intuitive. To him, the board wasn't chaos, it was jazz. McAllister noticed. Oh, he noticed. 3 weeks into the semester, he'd stopped pretending Camden didn't exist. He never called on him, never asked a question his way, but he saw him, that smirk again, like he couldn't wait for Camden to slip, to stumble, to confirm what everyone else already whispered, that the hoodie was a disguise for a student who didn't belong, that Camden Hill was an admissions mistake. Today's lecture felt different. McAllister's energy was off, tighter, edgier. There were people in the front row who didn't normally come to class. 4 of them, all older, 2 with blazers, 1 with a Department of Theoretical Mathematics pin on his lapel. They didn't take notes either. They just watched. Observers, guest faculty. Camden's pencil slowed. So, today was that kind of day. Open lecture, evaluation day, a performance. And McAllister? He wasn't here to teach. He was here to prove. Last week, McAllister said, turning to the board, we discussed the improper integral divergence over infinite bounds. Today we tackle something most of you, if not all, won't understand until graduate school. He paused, chalk in hand, letting the suspense settle. Let's see where the weak links are. And just like that, the math turned cruel. The equations were relentless. Nested integrals, error functions, a Laplace problem nested inside a Fourier domain. Camden tracked it all with calm eyes, even as the students around him fidgeted and whispered. Some were already falling behind. One girl beside him bit her lip hard enough to bleed, but no one dared interrupt. You didn't interrupt McAllister. He wrote fast, spoke faster, but it wasn't careless. It was a test. The kind of test meant to separate contenders from pretenders, a gauntlet, and halfway through an aggressive set of vector space conversions, Camden saw it. The slip, a tiny, almost imperceptible mistake, a limit function swapped, a boundary error. Subtle enough that it wouldn't matter, yet, but left unresolved, the answer at the end would collapse like a house on sand. No one noticed. The other students kept copying. The guest faculty kept nodding. Camden tapped his pencil once, then twice, then stopped. He looked around. No one else was reacting, not even the two grad assistants standing against the wall. He turned back to the board. The mistake was growing roots now, each new line of chalk compounding it like interest. And McAllister? He was still smiling. Do you see it? Camden thought. Do you really know what you're doing? Or are you just hoping no one else in this room is smart enough to call you on it? He exhaled slowly. This was the moment. He could stay quiet. Let it play out. Watch McAllister walk straight into his own error and let the students fail the assignment that would surely follow. But that wasn't Camden. It never had been. He didn't come here to survive. He came to learn, to build, to outgrow the ceilings people tried to put over his head. And so he raised his hand. One movement, just that. But in that space, in that room, it felt like an earthquake. Every eye turned. The four guest faculty shifted. Even McAllister blinked, as if surprised. He looked directly at Camden, face unreadable. Yes, he said, tone sharp. There's an issue with the limit in line 7, Camden replied, voice calm. You applied the transform assuming convergence on the negative axis, but the function isn't even over that domain. Silence, the kind that presses down on your chest. Someone dropped a pen, someone else whispered, yo, under their breath. And McAllister? He just smiled. But this time, it didn't reach his eyes. McAllister's smile lingered like smoke. He turned back to the board without answering Camden, casually reviewing the equation. His movement slowed, less theatrical now. The chalk hesitated in his hand as he scanned line 7, right where Camden had pointed. A flicker, barely visible, but Camden caught it. The professor's brow twitched. And then, without a word, McAllister adjusted the expression. A minor correction, barely noticeable to the untrained eye. But it was there. Camden had been right. He didn't gloat. He didn't shift in his seat. He didn't even let his expression change. But inside, something fierce and quiet unfurled its wings. The room, however, was less quiet. The students hadn't seen the error, but they saw the correction. They saw the professor hesitate, and they saw who caused it. In the corner, in the back, in the hoodie. Whispers began, soft and uncertain, sliding through rows like a change in wind. McAllister returned to teaching, more controlled now, a shade more measured. But the air had shifted. One of the guest faculty, an older man with a trim beard and eyes that didn't miss much, leaned over to whisper to the woman next to him. She nodded slowly, stealing a glance over her shoulder. Directly at Camden. He didn't flinch. He just went back to spinning his pencil. After class, the lecture hall drained like a slow leak. Students filed out, some already pulling out their phones, retelling the moment like it had happened in a movie. Yo, did you see that? Hoodie Kid corrected McAllister. That dude's brain is a weapon. He didn't even blink. Camden stayed seated. The storm of feet, backpacks, voices passed by like a wave. He didn't need to be in it. He didn't want to be part of the buzz. That wasn't the point. He waited until the room was nearly empty before standing. But as he slipped his notebook into his backpack, he heard a voice behind him. You! He turned. Professor McAllister stood halfway down the steps of the lecture pit, alone now. The chalk dust still clung faintly to his hands, and for the first time, there was no smirk. No edge, just a question. What's your name again? Camden didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, Camden Hill. McAllister nodded slowly as if filing it away. Then he said, You're in the wrong row. Camden blinked. What? McAllister motioned to the front. Next class. Sit where I can see you. There was no smile, no warmth, just a new kind of respect. Maybe not the kind Camden wanted, but the kind he earned. He walked out into the crisp fall air, hoodie still up, head still down. But now the whispers that followed him weren't about how he got into halberd. They were about how no one had ever seen McAllister pause like that, how the quiet black kid in the hoodie saw what no one else in the room did. He didn't stop walking, didn't wave, didn't look back. But that invisible math, the one he calculated every day, the equation of assumptions, expectation, and silence, it was starting to balance. For the first time, the variables were shifting in his favor. Camden Hill had always moved like a ghost, seen just enough to be ignored, but never enough to be noticed. That's how he liked it. But the moment he raised his hand and corrected McAllister, the cloak came off. He wasn't a shadow anymore. He was a spotlight. And in a place like Halberd, when someone like Camden, black, quiet, and hoodie-clad, stood out for the wrong reasons, the storm didn't take long to find him. It just waited, then struck. It started slow, always does. The kind of slights you could almost pretend were accidents. A missed invitation to the study group he'd been part of since week one. A joke from a TA about hoodie dress codes during a lecture on logical fallacies. A whiteboard in the common room that suddenly featured a crude drawing of a stick figure in a hoodie with a speech bubble saying, "Actually, Professor?" Camden saw it all, said nothing, let it slide. Letting it slide was an art form, a calculus of its own. He'd mastered it by 14. But Halberd was different. Here, the attacks didn't come with fists or threats. They came with implication, with humor, with cleverness disguised as cruelty. And nowhere did cruelty dress better than on Derek Whitmore. Derek was everything Camden wasn't. Tall, blonde, confident, wore loafers without socks and made it look intentional. Legacy student, National Math Olympiad semifinalist, son of a hedge fund partner who happened to sit on the university's alumni board. He wore privilege like it was tailored. And more than anything, he hated losing. Camden hadn't even spoken to Derek before that lecture. But the moment he corrected McAllister, clean, precise, undeniable, Derek turned. It wasn't rage, it wasn't even resentment. It was calculation. Because in that moment, Derek decided Camden had just committed a cardinal sin. He embarrassed one of their own. 2 days later, Camden was in the common area of the advanced mathematics building. Same spot, same routine. Hoodie up, earbuds in, working quietly through a probability set while the campus moved around him like static. He didn't hear the first step, but he heard the voice. Low, amused, sharp as a blade. Yo, Rain Man. Camden looked up. Derek stood across from him, two of his shadows, Brent and Cal, flanking him like a smug little army. All three held overpriced coffee cups like trophies. You fix any equations today, or are you taking a break from making McAllister look stupid in front of guests? Camden didn't respond, didn't blink, didn't rise. That's what made it worse. Derek leaned forward, arms folded on the table like they were buddies. Word of advice, man. Just because you get lucky once doesn't mean you belong. You feel me? Camden finally looked up, eyes calm. Then he went back to his notes. That silence, it burned hotter than any comeback, and Derek felt it. He smiled thinly. Must be nice, huh? Being the inspirational math genius from the catalog photo. All hoodie, no humility. He didn't say it, but Camden heard it. He always did. By Friday, it escalated. Someone leaked a photo of Camden at the back of the lecture hall. Head down, hoodie on, earbuds in. It showed up in the group chat for Calculus 4 honors. The caption? Silent but dead wrong. It wasn't clever, but it didn't need to be. The point wasn't to be funny, it was to isolate. Then came the memes. A black stick figure standing at a whiteboard, all wrong equations with a hoodie and a speech bubble. Trust me, I'm self-taught. Dozens of laughing reactions. Then another. A fake university brochure with Camden photoshopped on the cover. The tagline? Diversity looks like this. Competence not guaranteed. It stung. Not because it surprised him, but because it didn't. Camden had been waiting for it. He just didn't know how quickly it would come. He thought maybe someone would say something. A TA, a professor, a classmate. No one did. The memes stayed up. The comments stayed up. The thread kept growing. Camden didn't respond, didn't report it, didn't even look at the chat again. But he heard the whispers in class, felt the glances in the hallway, saw the tight smiles that always faded the second he passed. He'd been marked, not for failure, but for audacity. Audacity to be right, to be better, to not apologize for it. And for someone like Derek Whitmore, that was worse than being loud, worse than being arrogant. It was being unbothered. Camden zipped his hoodie higher that night as he walked across campus. Wind bit at his face. The sky stretched open and cloudless above him, dark and infinite. He didn't look up. He never did, because the higher you looked, the more people tried to drag you back down. He wasn't going to give them that chance. Not yet. Not ever. The next Monday, Camden walked into Linear Systems Lab 15 minutes early, something he rarely did. The room was nearly empty, except for one grad assistant typing notes and the sharp scent of dry erase markers in the air. He sat near the back again. It wasn't fear, it was habit. That hoodie, still up. That notebook, still open. His face calm, eyes alert, like someone taking inventory of the battlefield before the war. Because that's what it was now, social warfare. And Camden knew enough history to recognize a coordinated campaign when he saw one. When the rest of the students filtered in, Camden noticed something else. People weren't just looking at him, they were waiting for him. Derek entered last, laughing loud and easy like someone who owned the room. He made a slow arc across the aisle, greeted a few friends, then, without even glancing, took the seat directly in front of Camden. He stretched, yawned, then dropped a folded sheet of paper behind him, right onto Camden's desk. Camden didn't touch it, didn't even look at it for a full minute. He didn't need to. He could already feel what it was. Eventually, curiosity won. He unfolded the page. It was a mock quiz. 5 questions, handwritten. But the title said it all. Placement exam for students who slipped through the cracks. Underneath in pencil. Let's see if you're really here for your brain or your background. Camden stared at it for a long time. Long enough that Derek couldn't take it anymore. He half turned and whispered, "It's a joke." Chill. That smirk again. That smug, confident, untouchable smirk. Camden didn't reply. He didn't crumple the page. Didn't tear it up. Didn't hand it back. Instead, he calmly folded it in half, slid it back onto Derek's desk, and said just 4 words. Software even, surgical. You misspelled Gaussian. The smirk died. just for a second, and Camden didn't even blink. That afternoon, the campus forums lit up with a new post. Halberd Math goes woke, Hoodie hero or D failure. Camden's name wasn't mentioned, but his photo was. That same one from the calculus group chat, grainy, low resolution, snapped from behind. The post questioned the rigor of Halberd's admission process and speculated whether inclusion metrics were being prioritized over actual qualifications. The author used a pseudonym, Truth Equals Free Speech, but everyone knew it was Derek, or one of his friends, or someone in their orbit. And as always, the real damage wasn't in the content. It was in the silence, the way no one pushed back, the way the post got 137 upvotes, the way faculty didn't comment, but students nodded quietly in passing. Camden walked alone that evening. He always did, but now even the walk felt different. A girl passed him near the engineering building and looked away quickly. Two guys whispered and chuckled after he passed, and when he ducked into the student lounge to grab a tea, the barista, a guy who used to greet him, didn't say a word. He just rang him up, silent, dismissive, as if Camden had somehow become radioactive. Later that night, in his dorm, Camden sat at his desk staring at his whiteboard. It was full, dense, precise, beautiful. Matrices, dual spaces, Riemann zeta conjectures, not because they were required, but because he loved them, because his brain could breathe in the chaos of complex patterns. But none of that brilliance mattered in the hallway. None of that depth mattered to people who only saw his skin, his hoodie, his silence, and called it a threat. He pulled his chair back slowly, opened his notebook, and flipped past page after page of theorems. Then he turned to a blank one. At the top, he wrote 3 words. Don't react out last. Let them laugh. Let them post. Let them make him a meme. Because Camden didn't need their approval. He didn't come to Halberd to be accepted. He came to take what they said he couldn't earn, and he was just getting started. By Thursday, the mock quizzes showed up on 3 more desks, all anonymous. Same pencil, same taunt. Let's see if you're really here for your brain or your background. Camden didn't touch them, not because he was afraid, because he already knew the game. He'd seen it played in middle school, again in high school, and now here, just dressed up in cleaner fonts and sharper grammar. The message was always the same. We see you. We don't want you here. But Camden wasn't here to be wanted. He was here to win. In the dining hall, he saw Derek again. This time, he wasn't laughing. He was holding court. 5 students, mostly honors track, nodding as he spoke in that same cool, smug cadence. Camden caught a phrase as he passed. Not even sure he gets the work. He just memorizes and repeats, like a calculator that got lucky. A few chuckles followed. Camden didn't stop walking, didn't say a word, but his hoodie stayed up, and in the reflection of the hallway's glass panel, he caught Derek watching him, like a predator tracking something that refused to run. That night, Camden's dorm door had something taped to it, a printed page, bold font. Hoodie is not equal to Harvard. There was no name, no handwriting, just cheap symbolism dressed as cleverness. He peeled it off calmly, folded it into quarters, and slid it into the back pocket of his notebook, the one labeled Receipts. Because the thing about math, every equation leaves a trail, and Camden was building his. Friday morning came cold. Early frost clung to the bricks as Camden stepped onto the quad. His hands were buried deep in the hoodie's front pocket, knuckles clenched but eyes calm. He passed the library steps, past the statue of the founder, William Halberd, whose name adorned half the buildings and none of the scholarships Camden had applied for. Past 2 students who looked up from their phones and whispered something behind their sleeves. He didn't look back, didn't need to, because he knew what they were saying. He was the story now, not the real one, the edited one, the version that Derek and his kind were working hard to craft, the DEI experiment, the quiet fraud, the hoodie with an attitude. But Camden knew another version, the real one. He remembered nights in high school when he'd fallen asleep at the kitchen table solving proof trees, a torn hoodie for a blanket, and his mom's voice in his ear. Baby, you don't have to prove them wrong. Just prove yourself right. He hadn't understood it back then, but now it was gospel. He stepped into lecture hall 6B. McAllister was already at the board, marking up a fresh equation with his usual economy of motion. Precise, ruthless, elegant. Camden slid into his seat in the second row. Not the back. Not today. McAllister's eyes flicked toward him, unreadable. Then just for a second, he nodded and began. The equation sprawled across the board like a battlefield. A triple-layered integration problem with hidden trapdoors, variable substitution, piecewise function, Fourier logic embedded deep in the final stage. The kind of problem you didn't just solve, you navigated. Derek raised his hand midway through the first line, grinning as he offered a correction McAllister didn't ask for. He was wrong. McAllister said nothing, just turned back to the board and kept writing. Camden stayed quiet, watching, mapping, waiting. 10 minutes in, McAllister stopped, turned, and for the first time in weeks, called a name out loud. Mr. Hill, he said, would you mind completing this? A hush fell over the room. Eyes turned. Whispers died. Camden stood, walked down the aisle, took the chalk, and without fanfare, no preamble, no flex, he began to write, step by step, clean, logical, with absolute confidence, no theatrics, just truth, the kind that left no room for doubt. When he was done, he capped the chalk and placed it quietly on the tray. McAllister studied the board for a second, then nodded. That, he said, voice clear and final, is correct. No one clapped, no one cheered, but no one dared whisper either. Camden walked back to his seat in silence, sat down, pulled his hood up, and got back to work. In the back of the room, Derek's smirk was gone. In its place, a silence he didn't know how to weaponize, because the first strike had been thrown. And Camden, he hadn't even swung yet. Tuesday rolled in with skies the color of bruises, gray, low, suffocating. The kind of weather that made everything feel heavier. Backpacks, steps, breath. Camden moved through it like usual. Quiet, calculated, deliberate. Hoodie up, head down, eyes scanning every corner without ever seeming to look. But today something felt off. Something colder. A shift in the air. As if the storm brewing above Halbert had already broken. But only on him. He didn't notice it at first. Not when he left the dorm. Not during morning lecture. Not even during the long walk across campus to the student center, where he planned to print out a paper and disappear like always. But the moment he stepped inside, it hit him. Laughter. Not the kind that fills a room, the kind that stains it. He froze for just a second, took in the acoustics, the angle of the noise, the hush afterward, the way conversations paused when he passed. Then he saw it. 4 monitors in the atrium, playing a video, no audio, just subtitles. He knew that lecture hall, knew that board, that equation. It was him. The video had been edited, slashed and spliced with surgical cruelty. The beginning showed Camden walking up to the board, then a hard cut. The next shot showed him stepping away as if in defeat. His final answer, gone. The full problem, gone. In its place, overlays, sound effects, subtitles like knives. From Hoodie to Humble, Watch Halberd's Diversity Darling Choke live. Proof that calculators can't replace scholars. Camden Hill, a.k.a. the Curve Killer. Laughter rose around him, the kind that doesn't need volume to be deafening. He stood there and watched it. All 90 seconds. All lies. He didn't flinch, didn't step forward, didn't pull out his phone, but his jaw tightened beneath the shadow of his hoodie. The framing was viciously clever. They'd cut out McAllister's final confirmation, cut the line where he said, "That is correct." They replaced it with a dubbed-in voice filtered through distortion. "Thanks for trying. Maybe stick to tutoring middle school." Camden recognized the cadence. Derek, even masked, that smug rhythm gave him away. Like a jazz musician playing a dirty note and thinking no one could trace it. Someone laughed too loud behind him. A girl nudged her friend, whispered something. The friend looked at Camden, then away quickly, embarrassed. But not sorry. No one was ever sorry when the target didn't fight back. Camden turned and walked out. Not fast, not shaken, but something in his steps was different. Slower, heavier, like a fuse had been lit somewhere deep inside him. And now he was walking with a match in his hand. By the time he got back to the dorm, the video had been reposted to 3 campus group chats and 2 subreddits. Someone started a meme thread. Hoodie Genius Moments, fail compilation. Post 1, the video. Post 2, a freeze frame of Camden looking up mid-equation with the caption, "When you realize you don't belong here." Post 3, an AI-generated image of Camden in a graduation robe holding a fake diploma labeled Certificate of Participation. The thread hit 200 upvotes in 30 minutes. Nobody reported it. Nobody pushed back. Even the TA, who had liked 3 of Camden's previous posts, stayed silent. Silence had a shape now. It looked like complicity. He closed his laptop slowly, stared at the wall. Didn't cry, didn't break anything, didn't call his mom. He just breathed. In, outside, again, and again. He remembered something his father used to say before he passed. Don't waste time yelling at dogs that bark. Just keep walking. Let your work do the barking for you. Camden didn't respond to the video, didn't make a statement, didn't email the administration. He just opened his notebook, turned to a blank page, and wrote one word at the top, observe. Then he drew a box. Inside it, a timeline, a target, a plan. He didn't need revenge. He needed proof. And now, thanks to them, he had it. By Wednesday morning, Camden wasn't just a joke. He was the punchline. The video hadn't just circulated, it had spread like a digital wildfire, leaping across platforms, mutating through comments, each share twisting the narrative further. A once elegant moment of mathematical clarity now reduced to a 90-second hit piece, carefully clipped to make him look like a failure, an imposter, a fraud in a hoodie. Camden didn't check his phone when he woke up. He didn't need to. The silence in his inbox was answer enough. No check-ins, no questions, no allies. He didn't expect any. Halberd was built for self-preservation, not solidarity. By the time he walked into his linear systems lecture, it felt like the entire room had seen the video and memorized it like scripture. They didn't stare. They stole glances, sneaky, guilty, calculated. That was worse, because stares were honest. Glances were afraid of being caught. He sat in his usual seat, unbothered in posture, even if his pulse was a metronome inside his chest. The professor, Dr. Linda Chai, wrote a system of matrix equations across the whiteboard and asked, "Anyone want to simplify this using LU decomposition?" No one raised their hand. No one moved, except Derek, who turned his head slightly, just enough to aim a smirk in Camden's direction. It was a dare. Speak up. Show off. Try it again. Camden kept his hand down. He wasn't afraid of being wrong. He was done giving them ammunition. Let them think what they wanted. They already had. After class, Camden left the building with his hood up. The fall wind brushed across the courtyard, but he barely felt it. What he did feel, sharply, coldly, was the moment someone deliberately bumped his shoulder as they passed. He turned, a stranger, white, junior year math pin on his bag. The kid didn't stop walking, didn't look back. Camden said nothing, just filed it. He grabbed lunch and sat alone at his usual spot in the rear garden patio behind the science building. It was quieter there, no tables, just a low stone ledge by the fountain, barely wide enough to sit on, but far enough from traffic that nobody bothered him. At least they didn't used to. Today, a group of 5 students sat nearby, clearly louder than necessary. Their voices carried. So what if they just did open tryouts for STEM majors? One of them said, loud enough to echo. Make sure people actually know what they're doing. Someone laughed. Another chimed in. Yeah, because some people out here getting full rides just for wearing the right hoodie. Camden didn't turn, didn't flinch, didn't give them the moment they wanted. Instead, he pulled out his notebook. Not the one for class, the other one? The one with his observations, names, times, patterns. He wrote October 10th, 12:24 p.m. Targeted passive-aggressive conversation near fountain. 5 students, 3 males, 2 females. All honors, badges visible. He closed the notebook and finished his lunch. That night it got worse. He opened his laptop and saw it again, a second video. This one edited like a trailer. Halberd Math, the reality check. Same footage, but this time with dramatic music, slow motion captions, even reaction clips spliced in from random TikToks. It was a performance. Camden standing at the board, chalk in hand, cut to black before he finished. Then not everyone who makes it, makes it. Anonymous TA. He scrolled down. Thousands of views, hundreds of comments. And this time, even professors had reacted. One anonymous faculty account replied, "We value diverse perspectives, but rigor still matters." That one hurt, not because it was direct, because it was dishonest. Camden had been rigorous. That solution had been correct, and McAllister had confirmed it, publicly, but no one cared, because the video was viral, not the truth. Camden leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. His fingers hovered over the trackpad. He could delete his accounts, go dark, disappear into the background again. But that wasn't why he came to Halberd. He didn't come to survive. He came to be undeniable. So he clicked Save Video, created a folder called Proof. Then he opened his whiteboard, cleared it, and began sketching. Not a problem, a plan, because humiliation is a test. And Camden had never failed one. Thursday came with fog so thick you could barely see the top of the campus bell tower. It rolled in off the river, smothering the buildings like a wool blanket pulled over the eyes of the guilty. Camden didn't care. He wasn't looking up anyway. He had his hoodie on, his headphones in, and the kind of quiet rage behind his eyes that didn't burn. It froze. This wasn't pain anymore. It was clarity. As he walked into the central quad on his way to advanced theoretical logic, something new caught his eye. A flyer, dozens of them, posted on walls, bulletin boards, even a few taped to trash cans. Same design, Camden's face, cropped, low resolution, stolen from his university profile, slapped on a background of red and black spirals, like some twisted optical illusion. At the top in bold, "Know your frauds," and underneath, "Come to Math 301 for a live demonstration of imposter syndrome in action." Featuring Camden almost had it. Hill, date, today, time 2:15 p.m., location, Room 8C, Camden's next class. He stared at it for a long moment, then slowly peeled it from the board, folded it once, then again, slid it into the back pocket of his notebook labeled Receipts. The classroom was full that day, fuller than usual. People who never showed up for advanced logic now filled the back row, smirking behind coffee cups, nudging each other like they were waiting for a show. Camden entered last. No panic, no hesitation. He walked to his usual seat, dropped his bag, pulled out his notebook, and calmly scanned the room. Derek was in the third row. No shame, no nerves, just leaning back like a king watching peasants wrestle. And when Camden sat down, Derek raised his phone, pretending to scroll, but clearly recording. Camden met his eyes, didn't blink, just nodded. A slow, silent, measured nod. Professor Shy entered minutes later, looking puzzled by the crowd but too distracted to question it. He launched into the lecture with his usual monotone rhythm, chalk tapping against the board, filling it with quantifiers and symbolic inference. Camden followed it easily, but he wasn't here for the board. He was watching the room, the snickers, the side glances, the tension, palpable and staged, like they were hoping he'd crack, hoping he'd snap, hoping he'd prove the story they'd already told about him, that he was fragile, a fraud, a fluke. Halfway through, Professor Shi paused. "I'd like to try something different," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Let's solve this one interactively. Camden, would you mind coming up?" Murmurs spread like smoke. Camden stood, walked to the board, picked up the chalk. Someone near the back whispered, "Here we go again." Another chuckled, "Round two." Derek pressed record. Camden heard it all. He let them. He stood in silence for a moment in front of the massive whiteboard, staring at the complex expression Professor Shi had half completed. Then he took the chalk and wrote, "For all X in X, there exists Y in Y, such that." Line after line, he broke down the logic flow. No stutter, no pause, no error. He stepped through nested conditionals, used contradiction elimination perfectly, then closed the proof with a smooth, elegant QED at the bottom corner. The room was silent, not in awe, in discomfort, because they had been promised failure and got brilliance instead. He turned around slowly, made eye contact with no one, but made sure everyone saw him. Then, just as slowly, he walked back to his seat, placed the chalk gently on the table as he passed Professor Shea. When he sat down, Derek was still filming. Camden looked at him, held his gaze, and then said under his breath, but just loud enough, "Send that one too." When the class ended, nobody laughed, nobody snickered, and nobody said a word as Camden walked out. Because humiliation had been their goal, but they hadn't broken him. They'd exposed themselves instead. That night, Camden sat in his dorm room. He laid out every flyer, every screenshot, every meme, every message, all organized, labeled, time-stamped. He opened a fresh document. At the top, he typed, "Formal complaint, targeted harassment and digital defamation. Supporting materials attached." Then he opened a second tab, began writing something different. Not a complaint, not evidence, a speech, because the campus had a student symposium coming up. And this time, he wouldn't be silent. They could have stopped at the whispers. They could have kept it digital. Low-effort memes, quiet hallway snickers, anonymous comment threads riddled with dog whistles and plausible deniability. But when someone like Camden doesn't break, they push harder, because to people like Derek Whitmore, silence isn't dignity, it's defiance. And defiance, especially from a black kid in a hoodie, must be punished. Saturday morning arrived with fog so thick you couldn't see 10 feet ahead. Camden didn't see the ambush coming, not because he wasn't watching, because it didn't happen in the real world. It happened online. Again. Only this time they crossed the line. He checked his phone at 7:52 a.m., sitting on the edge of his dorm bed, the pale morning light barely spilling through his window. 10 new DMS, 5 tag notifications, 3 missed calls from friends, real ones, who hadn't said much lately, but now suddenly needed him to check Instagram right now. At the top of his screen, at Halberd Hoodie Files tagged you in a post. He clicked it and felt his stomach drop. The post was worse than anything before. A fake mugshot. His face photoshopped over a blurred-out prison intake photo. Dark circles exaggerated under his eyes. Hoodie cropped to look like he'd been arrested in it. His name in bold white block letters. Camden Hill, academic fraud and cultural performance artist. And below in italics, sources inside the department say his admission was politically motivated. Stay tuned for what they're hiding. Camden sat frozen, heart thudding like it wanted out. The comments were already in the hundreds. LMAO, not this dude again. He's still here? This campus really gave a scholarship to a meme. Someone had even reposted it to the university's unofficial Reddit under the thread title, Hoodie Gate, the timeline. It wasn't just personal anymore. It was coordinated, premeditated, cruel. He scrolled through the page. There were more posts, older ones he hadn't noticed before. One of him walking alone near the library, probably calculating how to milk more victim points. Another in the cafeteria line, overlaid with, when the free lunch tastes like affirmative action. Even a photo of him sitting in lecture, annotated like a sports playbook. Here we see the hoodie creature in his natural habitat, pretending to think. They weren't hiding anymore. The gloves were off. Camden got up slowly, paced his room, then sat down and opened his laptop with mechanical precision, like someone disarming a bomb they'd seen before. He had a folder already, labeled Receipts. He added the new screenshots, timestamped them, logged the usernames, the comment threads, the IP-adjacent metadata he'd quietly collected for weeks through cached forum pings and source inspections. They thought he wasn't watching. They were wrong. He called the Office of Equity and Student Conduct. No answer. It was Saturday. Then the Dean of Student Affairs. Voicemail. He stared at the blinking cursor on his screen, rage simmering low and silent under his skin. Not the kind that explodes, the kind that sharpens, that documents. By noon, he'd drafted 3 versions of a formal harassment complaint, one with legal language, one with narrative detail, one with both. He attached a 32-page PDF of evidence, screenshots, image analyses, edited video comparisons, and even a short dossier cross-referencing usernames to known student club rosters. Then he opened a blank document and wrote something different, an open letter. To Halberd, I see you. You dressed it up as comedy, as concern, as free speech. But we both know what this is. This is a coordinated attempt to discredit not just me, but anyone who looks like me and dares to exist here without apologizing. I didn't come here to perform. I came here to learn. I didn't come to be tolerated. I came to be excellent. And I've done that. Quietly. Relentlessly. Even while you mocked my clothes, questioned my intelligence, edited my success into failure, and passed it around like a party trick. But now, I'm done being quiet. Attached is everything you didn't think I'd track. Every post, every comment, every pattern. This isn't drama. This is evidence. You wanted a hoodie to fit your narrative. Instead, you got a mirror. See you in the hearing room. CH, he saved it, sent it, then posted it publicly. Email, Reddit, group chats, student Slack. Everywhere they'd spread the lie, he returned with truth. He didn't yell, didn't curse, didn't even sign his full name. He didn't need to. They all knew who he was. Now they'd know who they were too. The letter hit campus like a siren in a silent city. By Sunday morning, it had been shared on every major student group chat, circulated across Reddit, reposted on Instagram, and even quoted by a few Halberd faculty on Twitter. You wanted a hoodie to fit your narrative. Instead, you got a mirror. That line? It stuck. People didn't just read it, they felt it. The language was too clean, too focused, too sharp to dismiss as whining. It wasn't a rant. It was a reckoning. And for the first time since the video went live, the silence shifted. Not into outrage, not into apology, but into fear. Camden didn't bask in it. He wasn't that kind of kid. Sunday, he did what he always did. He woke early. He put on his hoodie. He walked the perimeter of the quad like clockwork, earbuds in, not to listen, but to observe. Halberd looked different now. People looked at him differently too. Some wouldn't meet his eyes and others nodded, awkward and guilty. And a few, just a few, looked at him with something else entirely. Respect. The quiet kind. The real kind. The earned kind. By noon, his inbox flooded. A junior from the English department wrote, "I saw the video and didn't say anything. I should have. I'm sorry." A law school TA replied to his open letter, offering pro bono help filing a Title IX harassment claim. Even a professor from political science shared the letter with the subject line, "This is how resistance sounds when it's fluent in logic." But Camden didn't celebrate. He was still building. This wasn't the victory. It was just the exposure. That afternoon, his hearing request was acknowledged by the dean's office. The meeting was set for Wednesday. He'd present his findings in front of a university panel. Meanwhile, an interim investigation would begin into the Instagram page and its associated student accounts. But that wasn't all, because the post had drawn more than attention. It had drawn retaliation. That evening, someone slid a manila envelope under Camden's dorm door. No name, just thick. Inside, printouts, his high school transcript, his personal essay from his Halberd application, letters of recommendation, all real, all confidential. And one more thing, a fake email chain formatted to look like it was between Halberd admissions officers. It read, "Camden Hill, promising optics. Low GPA, but the optics are strong. Might be useful for the fall diversity showcase." Below that, a typed comment, "Affirmative action superstar or institutional liability. Let's test it." The signature was blurred, but the implication was clear. They weren't just trying to humiliate Camden now. They were trying to erase his legitimacy altogether. He stared at the envelope, rage rising, but cold, controlled. This wasn't just bullying. This was institutional sabotage. And someone with access, wanted to scare him off. Wanted him to back down before the hearing. Wanted him to crack. But Camden Hill didn't crack. He documented. He scanned everything. Noted the watermark patterns, traced the fonts, and identified the metadata printed on the bottom corners of the paper. A tiny code that pointed directly to the Department of Enrollment's internal copy system. He added it to the folder. Label. Leak evidence, phase 2. That night he updated his open letter. Attached a second PDF. This time he named names, not accusations, patterns. A timeline of every known interaction, edited post, and passive-aggressive action taken against him. He didn't say who was guilty. He showed who had opportunity. He let the facts speak for themselves. Because at the end of the day, Camden was still a mathematician, and nothing makes a point clearer than clean, undeniable proof. Before bed, he sat on the floor, back against the wall, eyes closed, one hand gripping the drawstrings of his hoodie, the other resting on the edge of his notebook. For weeks, they mocked his silence, used it against him. Now, It was the only thing they feared. Wednesday arrived like a storm in dress shoes. Camden sat in the waiting area outside the dean's suite, alone, notebook on his lap, hoodie pulled halfway up. Not as armor, not as statement, just as truth. He didn't check his phone, didn't scroll, didn't run through his notes again. He didn't need to. He had prepared not for days, but for years, ever since the first teacher said you're bright for your background, or the first student asked, how'd you get into this program? This wasn't just a disciplinary hearing, it was the collision point, where perception would finally be forced to meet reality. At 9:01 a.m. sharp, the door opened. A student conduct officer called his name. He stood without a word, tucked the notebook under his arm, and walked inside. The room was simple. Long oak table, 5 panelists seated evenly spaced, laptops open, faces neutral. A university lawyer sat off to the side, pen hovering over a legal pad. On the other end, 3 empty seats. They were for Brent, Cal, and Derek. Only Brent showed up. His face was pale, sweaty, forced into a smile that couldn't find its place. The others? Unable to attend, according to the records. Camden smiled faintly. Cowards wear absences like armor. Dean Hartley opened the meeting with procedural statements, then with all the false politeness of academia, said, Mr. Hill, you may begin your presentation when ready. Camden opened his notebook. No stammer, no hesitation. He stood and spoke. Not loudly, but clearly. Not emotionally, but with the quiet conviction of someone who'd spent his whole life being underestimated. First, he showed the Instagram screenshots, then the metadata trails, then the timeline, each step documented, time-stamped, verified. He showed how multiple fake accounts shared identical IP logs. He presented the email chain, explained how the formatting didn't match the university's standard correspondence. Then he revealed the printer watermark code, linking the document to a specific copy machine housed in the Department of Enrollment's staff lounge. He never made an accusation. He didn't have to. He just showed the numbers, the pattern, the proof. By the time he finished, the panelists weren't typing. They were listening, really listening. And Brent, he wouldn't meet Camden's eyes, and not once. Dean Hartley cleared his throat. Thank you, Mr. Hill. That was extensive. One panelist leaned forward. Can you clarify the purpose of the second document, the one labeled institutional complicity? Camden nodded once. It's not a claim, he said. It's a context. He paused and then added, hostility doesn't grow in silence. It grows in protection. This didn't happen because of one student. It happened because the system let it. Silence. A heavy, honest silence. The kind that couldn't be filed away. The hearing ended at 10:26 a.m. Camden left without looking back. He didn't need to hear the outcome. He'd already won the part that mattered. By that afternoon, a campus-wide statement was released. The Office of Student Conduct has initiated formal investigations into multiple confirmed violations of the university's Code of Respect and Harassment policy. We stand by our commitment to a safe, equitable environment for all students. It didn't name names, but everyone knew. Derek Whitmore withdrew from the honors math track later that week. Brent disappeared from campus forums. Cal deleted his accounts. And at Halberd Hoodie Files, gone. Deleted without explanation, no apology, no closure, just silence. But this time, it wasn't Camden's. That Friday, Camden walked into the lecture hall, same seat, same hoodie, same steady breath. McAllister didn't say much, just nodded. And this time, when Camden raised his hand to contribute to a proof at the board, nobody laughed, nobody whispered, nobody filmed. They just watched and listened. The hoodie hadn't changed. The boy inside hadn't either. But the room would never be the same. The storm might have passed, but Camden knew better. In America, silence was never the end. It was just the pause before the next blow. And though the videos were down and the fake accounts had vanished, and Derek's whisper campaigns had gone dry, something deeper had shifted. Camden could feel it in the way people looked at him in class, wide-eyed, respectful, but still cautious. In the way professors now paused after calling his name, as if waiting for something bigger to follow, like he had become a symbol. And symbols in places like Halberd were dangerous, because they made people question the system that created them. And not everyone liked questions. On Sunday night, Camden got a text from someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Unknown number. Cam, you good? Saw your name on some DOJ brief. Call your dad. Now? Camden's chest tightened. He hadn't heard from his father in 6 months, not since the last family dinner turned into a debate about code switching, racial loyalty, and who got to define success in white spaces. He hesitated, then tapped the contact labeled simply Bishop. 2 rings, then a voice, deep, low, and unmistakably his. Cam. Hey, Camden said, quieter than he meant to. Sit down, his father said flatly. We need to talk. Bishop Hill didn't do small talk. He was a former federal prosecutor turned high-level consultant in D.C., known in certain corridors as the firewall. Because when political fires got too hot, Bishop was the man they called to step in, cover tracks, and clean messes before they exploded. Not a fixer, an enforcer. But to Camden, he was just Dad, the man who taught him chess at 5, taught him silence was power at 8, and taught him never to flinch when someone mispronounced his name at 13. I read the report, Bishop said. The hearing went in your favor. But that won't be the last move. Not here. Not at Halberd. Camden listened in silence. You embarrassed them. In public. In print. In data. Don't think they won't try to claw it back. I'm ready, Camden replied. I know you are, Bishop said, his voice shifting. But I'm not asking you to be. For a moment, the line went quiet. Then, you remember what I always said about shadows? Camden smiled faintly. They move first. Exactly. Then came the shift, the one Camden hadn't expected. I made some calls, Bishop said. Didn't like what I found. Camden's pulse quickened. What do you mean? I mean, Bishop said slowly, 2 names on the hearing committee are part of the Halberd Trustee Advisory Group. That group has connections to funding channels with political motivations, ones that go beyond academics. What kind of motivations? The kind that sees you as leverage, as a symbol to discredit, or use dot. Camden sat back in his chair, stunned. All this time he'd been playing defense against Derek, Brent, and Cal, the loud, obvious players. But they were pawns. Bishop had just pointed to the real board. And the real players? They wore suits, not sweatshirts. They sat in offices, not lecture halls. They didn't meme you. They erased you. Bishop's voice cut back in. Calm, deadly calm. I'm sending over a file. Read it. Memorize it. Then burn it. Burn it? It's a figure of speech, Bishop said. Mostly. Then quieter. This isn't about revenge, Cam. It's about survival. You want to change this system? First, you learn how it protects itself. Camden stared out the window. The campus below looked peaceful, sun-dappled, serene. But now he saw it for what it really was. A machine. One that had tried to chew him up and spit him out. And failed. Let me ask you something, Camden said suddenly. Yeah? Why now? Why step in? A pause, then Bishop said, because you stopped surviving. You started fighting. And the moment my son fights, I fight with him. By Monday morning, Camden knew 3 things for sure. The war wasn't over. His father was no longer watching from the sidelines. Someone powerful was very, very nervous. And that made him dangerous, not because he had power, but because he knew how to use silence like a scalpel now, and because he wasn't alone anymore. The file came through at 2:37 a.m., encrypted, Bishop's initials embedded in the title, BH-Halberdstack underscore doc6.pdf. Camden opened it in the dark, face lit only by the glow of his screen. What he saw made his stomach tighten. It wasn't just a student problem. The file included a donor correspondence chain referencing optics-based admits. Internal memos suggesting Camden's public visibility made the school vulnerable to narrative manipulation. A white paper from a think tank connected to a board trustee warning against overcorrection in academic institutions. A not-so-coded pushback against equity programs. And in the middle of it all, his name, Camden Hill, mentioned 7 times across 5 documents, once as a potential liability, once as a media trigger, and twice as a case study. He stared at those words, cold, sanitized, weaponized, and felt something shift inside his chest. It wasn't fear, it was resolve. They weren't trying to ruin him for who he was. They were trying to break him for what he represented. A smart, black kid in a hoodie who didn't ask for permission to be excellent. A student who never raised his voice, but made the whole room listen. He wasn't a problem. He was a mirror, and they hated what they saw in it. He forwarded the file to a secure cloud drive, encrypted it again, and printed out 2 hard copies. One stayed in a locked drawer under his bed. The other, he carried in his backpack. Not as a threat, as insurance. That afternoon, Camden entered the student union building for a meeting he didn't ask for, but couldn't ignore. A request had come through from the vice provost's office. A casual follow-up. Just a conversation, they said. Just a conversation? Right. He stepped into the glass-walled conference room on the 3rd floor, where the halberd skyline stretched out behind the campus like a framed promise. Inside sat a woman in her 50s, gray blazer, neatly cropped hair, calm eyes. Her name tag read, Dr. Ellen Royce, Office of Institutional Advancement. But Bishop had already told him who she really was, a liaison between the university's money and its message. Camden, she said, rising to shake his hand, all warmth and polish. He nodded. Dr. Royce, please sit. This won't take long. She smiled the way lawyers do, kind but distant, practiced like a routine. I just wanted to check in, she said. After your very public statement last week. Camden said nothing. She continued. You've stirred quite the conversation on campus and beyond. National news picked up the story. A few think tanks are watching. Even a few congressional staffers have reached out. She paused, eyes narrowing slightly. You've made yourself visible. Camden tilted his head, not confused, interested. Is that a problem? Dr. Royce's smile didn't flinch. Only if you let it become one. That was the first veiled threat, and Camden caught it instantly. So he leaned forward, unzipped his backpack, and placed a single sheet of paper on the table. Nothing dramatic, just the donor email with the words media trigger and his name underlined. She looked at it, didn't touch it, didn't need to. The message was clear. Camden wasn't scared, he was armed. You wanted to check in, Camden said, voice steady. Now it's my turn. Dr. Royce blinked. Going forward, Camden continued, I expect transparency. I expect protection. I expect that when I walk into a lecture hall, I'm not walking in as your liability, but as your student. And if that's too much to ask, he let the silence sit, unfold, pierce, then added softly, I know people who know what to do with receipts. She didn't answer right away, just nodded once, then gathered her folder. Thank you for your time, Camden. He stood, shook her hand, and turned toward the door. But before he left, he said without looking back, "Tell the trustees, the hoodie isn't coming off." The night after the Royce meeting, Camden sat on the rooftop of Langdon Hall, hoodie pulled tight, legs crossed, a pen resting behind his ear like it belonged there, which it did. The campus below him shimmered in lamplight. Students wandered past in pairs, backpacks bouncing, laughter bubbling like nothing had ever happened. Like his face hadn't been pasted onto a fake mugshot. Like his name hadn't been dragged through forums and group chats. Like he hadn't almost been turned into a cautionary tale. But up here, the noise faded. The story shrank. And in that silence, Camden finally heard himself again. He took out his notebook, the red one, the one that held not problem sets but strategy, and flipped to a page titled Reconstruction. Underneath it, he began to sketch. Not a revenge plan, not a manifesto, a map, a new kind of blueprint for staying visible on his own terms, for protecting himself without disappearing, for helping others see what he now understood in his marrow. Quiet does not mean powerless. That weekend, he made his first move. He signed up to speak at Halberd's annual fall symposium. The theme? When Silence Speaks, Transforming Institutional Narratives. Perfect. They wanted him quiet. Now he'd speak in full sentences to a room full of donors, faculty, and students who had already heard of him, but never heard from him. He didn't tell anyone in advance, not even his professors. But when his name hit the printed programs, it landed like a shockwave. Some people rolled their eyes, some panicked. And a few, especially those on the trustee advisory committee, suddenly started asking who had approved the lineup. Camden just smiled, because his name was already inked. The day of the event, Bishop Hill arrived, unannounced. Camden found him waiting at the back of the auditorium in a tailored charcoal suit, leaning against the wall like he owned it. He didn't clap, didn't wave, just gave a single slow nod. Camden nodded back. No words were exchanged. None needed. Because when a shadow wakes, it doesn't roar. It just stands, and everything else shifts around it. Camden stepped onto the stage in his hoodie. No suit, no tie, just him, a microphone, and a truth too long buried. He looked out across the crowd, packed rows of students, some leaning forward, some holding back, and in the front row, Dr. Ellen Royce, sunglasses tucked into her blazer, mouth a tight line. Let her watch. Let them all watch. He began slowly. I've spent most of my life being quiet. Pause, and not because I didn't have anything to say. Pause, but because I wanted to survive long enough to be heard. The silence in the room deepened. No typing, no coughing. Just the kind of attention that only comes when a room finally realizes it underestimated the speaker. I was told silence was safer, told it would protect me, told it would keep the peace. But I've learned something these last few weeks. Now Camden's voice grew firmer. Silence may protect the body, but it will never protect the truth. He walked them through his story, not as a victim, not as a hero, but as a witness. He spoke of the memes, the fake pages, the doctored videos, but more than that, he spoke of the system that let it happen. The silence of faculty, the inaction of admins. The way accountability only arrived when exposure became inconvenient. He didn't name names, but he named the machine, and he named his resistance to it. I didn't come here to make anyone comfortable, he said. I came here to learn and to be excellent. And if that excellence makes this institution uncomfortable, then good. He ended with the line that would echo long after the stage lights dimmed. I am not your mascot, your metric, or your mistake. I am your mirror, and I'm not going anywhere. Thunderous silence, then one clap, then more, until the room erupted. But Camden, he didn't smile. didn't bow. He stepped off the stage as quietly as he'd arrived and walked past the rows of people who once doubted him, now too stunned to do anything but watch the hoodie walk past. When power collapses at places like Halberd, it doesn't scream, it whispers. Not because it's graceful, but because it's ashamed. The men who built the walls of that university never imagined they could be cracked by someone like Camden Hill, a quiet, black kid in a hoodie with a 4.0 GPA and a habit of saying more with silence than most said with speeches. But now their walls weren't just cracking, they were falling. It began with a Friday memo, the kind of email no one talks about, but everyone reads 3 times. Subject: interim measures and ongoing conduct reviews, internal use only. In short, 2 teaching assistants were removed from class duties. One admissions director was placed on administrative leave. A guest lecturer associated with one of Halberd's wealthiest donors had been excused from future speaking engagements. And most telling of all, 3 students were under investigation for academic misconduct, cyber harassment, and reputational defamation. Camden didn't need the names he already knew. Brent, calculations, Derek, the unholy trinity of smug, privilege-dripping sabotage artists. Only now, their arrogance had become evidence. By Monday, the campus shifted. The forums quieted. The memes disappeared. Group chats that once joked about Camden now deleted whole threads before his name even came up. In the cafeteria, tables went quiet when he passed. No more laughter, just awareness. Even professors seemed to speak differently now. They paused before calling on him, watched how they phrased questions, as if suddenly they realized the hoodie they once ignored wasn't hiding someone lost. It was protecting someone unbreakable. In the math department's admin office, a plaque with Derek Whitmore's name, previously commemorating his outstanding research contribution, was quietly taken down. No announcement, no press release, just removed. And in its place, nothing, just blank wood, empty, like the trust they once had in him. Camden didn't gloat. He didn't tell anyone. He just kept going. Office hours, study groups, late nights in the library. But under the surface, the gears were moving. That Wednesday, the Office of Institutional Integrity sent a formal letter to Camden. It had 3 key points. He would be officially cleared of any misconduct, academic or otherwise. A full investigation had substantiated his claims of targeted digital harassment. He had the right to press charges with university legal counsel and possibly beyond. That last line, it landed like thunder because it wasn't about suspension anymore. It was about liability, and Halberd knew it. Bishop called that night. He didn't say, "I told you so." Didn't brag about the political pressure he'd helped apply from behind the scenes. He just said, "Now they're listening." Camden exhaled. "They're scared," he said. "They should be," Bishop replied, then paused. "But don't mistake fear for regret. They're not sorry. They're just exposed." Camden nodded slowly. "I know. And don't expect them to rebuild anything for you." "I'm not waiting for that." "Good," Bishop said, "because people like us, we don't inherit systems. We design new ones." By the end of the week, Camden's name was on every campus news site, but not as a target, as a voice. Headlines read, "Student who faced harassment sparks equity overhaul at Halberd." Institutional bias confronted, Camden Hill's stand draws national attention. From hoodie to hero, how a quiet student changed the culture of an elite university. The last one made Camden wince. He didn't want to be a hero. He just wanted to breathe. Without having to apologize for the space he took up. Without having to prove he belonged every time he raised his hand. But he knew how stories worked, and if people needed a headline to understand the weight of what had happened, so be it. On Sunday night, he walked through the quad alone. The moon hung low, the lamps buzzing faintly like tired ghosts. He wore the same hoodie, not to make a point, but because it was his. Always had been. He passed the statue of William Halberd, bronze, cold, towering over a plaque that once made him feel small. This time, Camden didn't look down. He looked through it, then kept walking. One hand in his pocket, the other gripping his red notebook. Because the fall wasn't the end of anything. It was the start of everything. On Monday morning, a subtle shift happened in the very bones of Halberd. It started in room 204 of the Mathematics and Logic building. Professor McAllister, the same one Camden had once publicly corrected, walked into class, set down his leather briefcase, and before opening his notes, said three unexpected words. "Camden, you lead." The chalk was already on the tray, the problem already half written. Camden stood slowly, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness. He could feel the weight of every eye in the room. Not judgment anymore. Curiosity, respect, maybe even a little fear. He walked to the board, finished the equation, not with flair, with precision, and when he turned back, McAllister simply nodded. "Correct," the professor said, his voice flat. But this time, not condescending, just factual. Camden didn't return to his seat feeling triumphant. He felt equal, and at Halberd, that alone was a revolution. Outside the classroom, the university's legal machinery kept moving. Camden received another letter, this one more detailed, more formal. It read, "Pursuant to the Institutional Equity Act and University Code of Conduct, Section 3B, the following parties have been referred for disciplinary action." The list went beyond Brent, Cal, and Derek. Now it included a senior IT staff member who had knowingly ignored harassment flags in the campus network, a faculty liaison who had previously dismissed Camden's concerns, a development officer who was directly connected to the donor-backed scholarship manipulation exposed in Bishop's document drop. Each name was followed by one word: resigned. Some had left voluntarily, some had been shown the door, but all had fallen under the same truth. Camden had told no lies. Later that day, Camden got a call from Halberd's Office of Communications. They wanted to feature him in the annual university publication. Student Voices, Halberd's Next Generation. He paused. "Who else is being featured?" There was silence on the line. Then the staffer admitted, "Just you for now." Camden smiled, not out of pride but irony. They once edited him out of the narrative. Now they wanted him to carry it. "Tell the team I'm flattered," he said, "but I write my own stories." Click. That evening, a reporter from a national education outlet emailed him. "We're doing a piece on institutional bias and student resistance. Would you be open to an interview?" Camden replied with one line, "Only if I can bring three others with me." The journalist agreed. So Camden reached out to two freshmen who had reached out weeks ago, thanking him for speaking up. One was a queer black girl from Atlanta, the other a first-gen student from El Paso. Then he messaged a junior who'd been quietly pushing for disability inclusion behind the scenes. They met in the library. He handed each of them a page of talking points, not about him, but about how systems ignore until they're exposed. "Say what's real," Camden said. "The mic's already on." Meanwhile, Derek was nowhere to be found. Some said he transferred. Others said he was taking time. Camden didn't care, because Derek wasn't the enemy anymore. The silence that protected him was. Walking back to his dorm that night, Camden noticed something small, but powerful. A flyer, stapled crooked on a bulletin board next to the cafe. Plain white paper, black bold letters. It read, "We see you, Camden. Thank you for standing. Halberd First Gen Collective." He stared at it, Let it sink in. Not because he needed validation, but because it meant the thing he fought for, truth, wasn't echoing in an empty room. He got back to his dorm, sat at his desk, opened the red notebook, and flipped to the page labeled Post-Fall Strategy. At the top he wrote, "They cleaned the surface. Now we scrub the roots." Then underneath, Peer Review Committee for Scholarship Equity, Rebuild Trust in TA Hiring Practices, Anonymous Faculty Audit System, First-Generation Mentorship Pipeline. It wasn't revenge, it was architecture. Because the system had fallen. But what came next? That was up to him. The real fall, the one Camden had waited for, came quietly late on a Thursday evening. He was walking back from the library, hoodie pulled tight against the wind, his backpack heavy with 2 textbooks, a notebook full of reforms, and the weight of months he hadn't yet allowed himself to process. He wasn't thinking about Derek, or Brent, or the administration. He was thinking about what came after. Then his phone buzzed. "Unknown number, DC area code." He answered, and a voice said, "Camden Hill?" "Yes." "This is Leah Samuels, Office of Civil Rights. You've been named in a federal oversight report about equity violations at Howard University. You're not in trouble. We're requesting your input." Camden blinked. "Federal?" "Yes. Your case was flagged during a cross-audit of scholarship funding patterns across elite institutions. Apparently, you started a ripple." A pause, then she added almost warmly, "You should know. Your name's been mentioned in at least 3 university reform committees outside your state. One professor called you the algorithm that fought back." Camden didn't laugh. He just exhaled. Because it wasn't about being famous. It was about being undeniable. Back on campus, other ripples had started forming. In Professor Chai's class, students began showing up early just to talk about real-world applications of mathematical ethics. In the dining hall, someone posted QR codes that linked to Black student scholarship initiatives. And on Camden's dorm door, someone had taped a note. One word, handwritten, respect. Friday morning, the Halberd Weekly dropped a surprise editorial. Not written by staff, not by faculty, by McAllister. The title, "We Were Wrong About Silence." It began like this. "As an educator, I used to believe silence in the classroom was a sign of uncertainty. Camden Hill taught me that silence can also be strategy, a form of intellect that doesn't require noise to shake a system to its core. What we witnessed this semester was not a rebellion. It was a recalibration, and it came wearing a hoodie." Camden read it twice, then folded the page neatly and slipped it into the back of his red notebook. Not as a trophy, as a reminder. Later that day, Dean Hartley asked him to meet, this time not behind closed doors, this time at a round table with faculty, students, and administrators. A real seat, a real microphone. No performance, no tokenism, just policy. Camden didn't say yes right away. He asked who else would be invited. When Hartley mentioned 2 first-gen students, 1 disability advocate, and a freshman from South Carolina who had quietly helped Camden track digital harassment patterns, Camden nodded. "Then I'll show up," he said. The meeting happened that next Tuesday. At the head of the table sat Bishop Hill, unannounced, watching everything like a chess master at the end of a long game. Camden didn't even flinch. He took his seat, opened his notebook, and led with one line. "Let's talk about how we rebuild this without pretending it wasn't broken. The reforms didn't happen overnight, but they started, and people noticed. A few students mocked it online, still clinging to their smirks, even as the institution that once protected them slipped out from under their feet. But most leaned in. And slowly, Halberd became less about who had always been loudest and more about who had always been right." That night, as the wind whispered across campus and lights flickered out in the library windows, Camden walked alone again. Same hoodie, same quiet steps. But something had changed. He was no longer walking away from anything. He was walking through the ruins of a lie, through the space he had carved for himself, through a story he didn't ask to be in, but now owned. Time moved differently now at Halberd. Gone were the days when Camden Hill slipped into lecture halls without notice, his hoodie blending him into the corners. Gone, too, was the feeling that he needed to shrink to survive. What replaced it wasn't fame, wasn't celebration, it was something rarer. Credibility, hard-earned, unshakable, the kind that didn't need applause. Camden had become a quiet fixture, but not the kind they once ignored. Now when he raised his hand, professors paused. When he entered a room, heads turned. Not with mockery, but with respect they didn't know how to express. But Camden didn't care for fanfare. He cared for change. He used to think change had to be loud. Now he knew better. Change was deliberate, measured, strategic. Like good math, it required proof and patience. So Camden began where the pain started, the students. He started hosting what he called decoding sessions every Tuesday and Thursday evening in the back of the library's lower level, a dusty seminar room no one cared about until Camden filled it. He didn't promote it. He didn't ask for permission. But by week 2, 10 students showed up. By week 4, it was 35. Freshmen, first generation, international. Quiet kids with loud thoughts. Camden didn't lecture. He facilitated. He laid out equations that applied to the real world. How statistical bias appears in predictive policing models. How data privacy fails communities of color. How redlining could be mapped using historical functions buried in tax code tables. He used math to show what society tried to hide. And the students? They listened like their futures depended on it, because in some ways they did. After one session, a sophomore named Mari stayed behind. She was small, wore oversized sweaters, and carried 3 notebooks at all times. One for notes, one for quotes, one for dreams, she once told him. She asked, "How do you deal with the pressure of being right all the time?" Camden tilted his head. She clarified, "I mean, when everyone's waiting for you to fail, but you can't, because if you do, it's not just about you." He nodded slowly. "I stopped trying to be right," he said. Mari blinked. "But you're always right." Camden smiled gently. "No, I just prepare so well that by the time I speak, I've already questioned myself twice. I fail in private so I can stand in public." Mari looked at her notebook, then scribbled something down. He never asked what. He didn't need to. Meanwhile, Halberd was transforming inch by inch, quietly and awkwardly, like an old machine learning a new rhythm. The Office of Equity launched a pilot mentorship program. The math department introduced a new course titled Ethics in Quantitative Spaces, co-designed by Camden and a former adjunct he trusted. And the annual scholarship committee invited 3 students from Camden's decoding sessions to sit in as reviewers, an unprecedented move in a place that had once defined exclusivity by secrecy. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Camden watched it all from the sidelines, declining every photo op, every offer to share his story in glossy alumni newsletters. He didn't want a statue, he wanted a structure. And so he began to build one. He drafted the framework for a student-led accountability board, a peer-formed network that would monitor not just harassment, but systemic barriers in grading, participation, and faculty conduct. He submitted it quietly, didn't attach his name. But when the dean saw the proposal, she smiled to herself, because the formatting, the clarity, the signature logic that moved like chess, Camden, and even without his name on it, everyone understood. The kid in the hoodie wasn't just fighting back anymore. He was designing the future. Still, not everything changed. Not overnight. There were still smirks, still skeptics, Still those who waited, quietly hoping Camden would stumble. But he didn't live for them. He lived for the moments in between. The thank you notes slipped under his door. The student who stayed after class just to say, "You helped me believe I deserve to be here." The janitor who nodded at him one morning and said, "Keep walking like that, young brother. World watches how you move." One morning, Camden opened his mailbox to find an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photo. It was him, standing on stage at the fall symposium. The quote behind him read, "I am not your mascot, your metric, or your mistake." Underneath, in clean handwriting, "You're our example." He stared at it for a long time, then gently folded the photo, slid it into the back of his red notebook, and walked out the door. Because the lesson wasn't done, and the next equation was already waiting. By mid-November, Halbert looked the same, but felt different. The building still stood tall, brick and ivy wrapping around history like tradition. The quad still hummed with students balancing coffee, textbooks, and dreams too big for their schedules. But the energy had shifted, because now when students sat in class and watched someone like Camden speak up, they didn't roll their eyes. They leaned in. They listened. Because Camden hadn't just changed the rules. He'd reminded them they had a right to be in the game. It was a quiet Thursday when Dr. Royce approached Camden outside the student center. She looked different now, less composed, slightly weary, like someone who had been called into too many meetings with people who were finally asking questions she couldn't control. "Camden," she said with a tight smile, "do you have a moment?" He looked up from his notebook, paused, then nodded. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "Your input has helped us re-examine our internal structures." Camden nodded once, glad to hear it. "And I hope you know," she added, "we're committed to protecting your voice and others like it." Camden looked her in the eyes. "My voice doesn't need protection," he said. "It needs room." That was all he said before walking away. No bitterness, no drama, just truth. He didn't believe institutions change because they felt guilt. They changed because someone made not changing more costly. And Camden had done just that, with silence, strategy, and substance. But now he was beginning to see the other half of the equation. It wasn't just about tearing down what was broken. It was about building what could stand in its place. He started partnering with faculty in other departments, sociology, political science, even architecture. Together, they designed a cross-disciplinary pilot program, Power and Pattern, mapping oppression through data. The course didn't just teach math. It taught how numbers, graphs, and algorithms could be weaponized or liberated. They offered it as an elective. 63 students signed up in under a week. It was the first time in Halbert's history that a STEM course had a wait list made up of English majors, gender studies concentrators, and international relations students. It was also the first time a sophomore, Camden, was listed as co-creator. At the decoding sessions, Camden had stopped using the board as much. Now he asked more questions than he answered. He learned how to step back, how to let others discover things for themselves. It wasn't about showing how much he knew anymore. It was about showing others how much they could. One night, after a particularly heated discussion about algorithmic bias in AI tools, Mari asked, "So what do we do with this? How do we change it?" Camden smiled. "You already are." That winter, Camden submitted a proposal to create a formal mentorship pipeline for first-gen students entering STEM fields. It was simple. Director, backed with data. He didn't attach his name. But when the university approved it, they knew. They always knew. And when a freshman girl from Oakland emailed the student board asking, "Can I talk to whoever made this happen?" Camden replied himself, not with a big speech, just, "You've got time. Let's talk." There were still hard days. Moments when he overheard someone mutter "poster boy" as he walked past. Moments when the institutional weight of it all, the pressure, the expectation, the unrelenting eyes, felt like too much. But on those days he opened his red notebook, not to the pages with proof, to the pages with purpose. Quotes, scribbles, student names, plans, lines that read, "The goal isn't to survive the system. The goal is to replace it with something better." Those pages reminded him why he kept going, not for recognition, but for everyone coming after him who didn't want to wear a hoodie just to feel safe, who wanted to wear it because it was theirs. And if someone asked Camden what the lesson was, what he learned from all of it, he'd probably answer with a shrug, a half smile, and something quiet like, "That truth doesn't shout, it walks." The snow came early that December, not enough to shut down the campus, but enough to coat the sidewalks, frost the tops of bike racks, and soften the noise of a school that had finally started learning how to listen. Camden walked across the quad slowly, his hoodie up, hands deep in his coat pockets, breath turning to fog. Finals week buzzed around him, laptops open in laps, coffee cups clutched like lifelines. But his mind wasn't on grades. He had already passed the hardest test of his life, and it didn't have a scantron. That morning, the math department released a statement, brief, formal, but unlike any it had issued before. In recognition of student-led initiatives that have led to measurable policy improvement and cultural shift within our academic community, we are proud to acknowledge Camden Hill for his contributions to institutional reform, not achievement, not excellence, contribution. The wording mattered. It meant they finally saw him not as an outlier or anomaly, but as an architect. Camden didn't tell anyone. He let the email speak for itself. What mattered more was what came next, and that came later that evening, when he stepped into the final decoding session of the semester. They'd outgrown the seminar room by then. Now they met in one of the old lecture halls, room 6A, ironically the same space where his Humiliation had once gone viral. Tonight it was packed, 60 students, minimum, different backgrounds, different majors, but all here because of what the sessions had become, a space to think freely, to question the system, to learn without apology. And tonight, they waited for Camden to close it out. He stepped to the front, chalk in hand, then paused. Behind him, the blackboard stood clean. No numbers, no formulas, just space. Perfect. He looked out at the group and smiled. "I want to end tonight with something different," he said. No microphone, no slide deck, just his voice. "I came here thinking math would be the hardest part of my education." Soft chuckles. "I was wrong." He stepped closer to the edge of the stage. "Turns out the hardest part was learning how to be me in a place that expected me to be them." Now they were quiet, not just to be smart, but to be smart while wearing this hoodie, while walking through this skin, while refusing to code switch to make people comfortable. A girl near the back wiped a tear. Someone whispered, "Say that." Camden continued. "And for a long time I thought I had to fight alone, that speaking up meant giving them what they wanted, a reason to say I didn't belong." He paused, looked down at the chalk in his hand. "But I learned something this year." He turned and on the board wrote 3 words. "Truth is cumulative." The room leaned in. "That's how they built the lie," he said. "One little story, one little meme, one look, one assumption at a time. And that's how we undo it. One class, one session, one decision to stay real even when silence feels safer." He dropped the chalk on the tray with a quiet tap. No applause yet, just reverence. Then he smiled again, tired but alive. "This isn't about me anymore. It never really was." He motioned to the crowd. "It's about you." Every time you speak when it's easier not to. Every time you stay after class. Every time you help someone else figure it out instead of flexing what you already know. He nodded once. I'm not your hero. He stepped down from the platform. I'm your reminder. The students clapped, not in a burst, but a build, like rising rain. No one recorded it. No one needed to. It was one of those rare moments that wasn't meant for likes or shares. It was meant for them, for now, for next. Later that night, Camden walked alone through the snow, past the statue of William Halberd. He paused there for the first time in months, looked up. The plaque still read the same, but it didn't weigh on him anymore. Because now his name was etched somewhere they couldn't take it back. In minds, in policies, in culture. He wasn't a glitch in their system. He was the update. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't bracing for the next attack. He was preparing for the next student. January mornings at Halberd had a way of making everything feel suspended in breath. The trees stood stripped bare, like truths no longer afraid to show themselves. The stone steps glistened with frost. The air was sharp enough to remind you you were alive, whether you liked it or not. Camden Hill zipped up his hoodie, pulled the strings just tight enough to shield his ears, and stepped out into that cold like it belonged to him. Because it did now. He no longer walked with hesitation. He walked like he had nothing left to prove and everything left to build. It was his last semester on campus. He would graduate early, his coursework complete, his thesis submitted, his record clean. No cheating, no shortcuts, no broken code of conduct, just grit wrapped in numbers and silence. He didn't attend the awards dinner when they offered him Student of the Year. He sent an email instead. I wasn't here to be a symbol. I was here to study. Respect to those still walking. That email made its way around faster than the photos ever could. It got screen capped, quoted, misunderstood by some, respected by others. But Camden didn't care. He'd already said everything he needed to. Now it was time to walk. He started his morning like always, cutting through the East Quad, boots crunching over icy sidewalks. This time he wasn't alone. Behind him, footsteps matched his pace. Two freshmen he recognized from his decoding sessions, bundled in scarves and thick jackets. They didn't say anything, just walked. He let them, because sometimes legacy isn't in who follows you. It's in who walks beside you. Quiet, determined, unafraid. Camden made a stop at the financial aid building, not to pick anything up, to drop something off, a sealed folder, inside a donation form, filled out and signed. He was starting a fund. Small at first, just a few $1,000s, money he earned from a consulting gig he never bragged about. But the fund was simple, direct, and potent. The Hoodie Grant. For students with no legacy, no connections, and no trust fund, just potential that hadn't been polished yet. He told the office staff not to name it after him. Call it whatever makes them feel like they belong. Then he nodded and walked back out into the cold. No cameras, no handshake photos, no Instagram story, just footsteps. At the library, he passed the new Student Advocacy and Equity office. Inside, a meeting was underway. 5 students at a long table, laptops open, intensity on their faces. One of them caught his eye and gave him a subtle nod. Camden returned it, brief and proud. They were building now, not burning. He stopped by room 6B. Empty. The same lecture hall where Derek once smirked from the 3rd row, where Camden had been edited into a punchline, where he'd returned to rewrite the narrative. He stepped inside just to see it one last time. The lights were off, the air still. He walked to the front, stood at the board, and looked out at the empty seats. For a second, he could still hear the echoes, the mocking laughter, the silence after he finished that first proof, the sound of being watched but not believed. But then he remembered the applause at the symposium, the decoding sessions, the student who called him a reminder. So he smiled, and with his finger wrote one word in the dust on the board: endure. Then turned, walked out, and never looked back. Outside, snow had begun to fall, light at first, then steadier. He passed the old oak tree where they once posted the "Hoodie Not Equal to Harvard" flyer. Now, a laminated poster hung on a hook. Representation is not revolution, but it's how it starts. Anonymous student submission. He chuckled under his breath. Progress had a way of talking back. As he crossed the quad, Camden saw a new mural by the West Campus wall. It wasn't slick or sponsored, just spray paint, stencils, and student hands. A hoodie, no face, just posture, confident, upright, walking forward. Underneath, he didn't raise his voice. He raised the standard. No name. Didn't need one. And Camden, he kept walking. Hood up, hands in pockets. Red notebook in his backpack. The wind pushed at his shoulders, but he didn't lean into it. He let it carry him forward. Because Halberd would remember the headlines. But the students, they would remember the hoodie. And more importantly, they would wear their own. 2 days before the semester ended, Camden visited the one place on campus he'd never entered. Not once. The trustee gallery. Tucked between the administrative offices and the presidential suite, it was a corridor lined with framed portraits. Oak-paneled walls. Dim lighting. Plaques in serif fonts. Generations of donors, deans, and visionaries staring down with stony expressions. Every face white. Every gaze firm. A wall of legacy meant to intimidate. Camden stepped in, slow and quiet. Not to challenge. To witness. His boots echoed across the marble tile as he passed oil paintings of men who built fortunes and reputations off students they never intended to understand. Their names were carved into the names of buildings, scholarships, annual lectures. Some of them had once tried to keep kids like Camden out. Some had succeeded, but not anymore. At the end of the hallway, one frame hung empty, a placeholder for the next trustee. Camden stood in front of it for a long time, not because he wanted to be there, but because he needed to remember this. Power doesn't last forever, not when it forgets how to serve. He pulled a small photo from his notebook, folded once, worn at the corners. It was the image from the symposium, him at the mic, the words, "I'm not your mascot" behind him. He didn't hang it. He didn't need to vandalize the wall. He just placed it gently on the bench beneath the frame. A silent offering, a reminder. Then he turned and walked out, and that was enough. The next day, Camden packed his things. He wasn't leaving out of bitterness. He had stayed long enough to shift the air, long enough to give the next generation space to breathe. Now it was time for someone else to carry the spark. He packed the red notebook last, but not before flipping through it. Page after page filled with equations, timelines, observations, names. Some crossed out, some circled, all remembered. At the very back, a quote he had written months ago stared back at him. The moment you realize your silence isn't for safety, it's been weaponized against you, you stop surviving, and you start leading. Camden closed the notebook slowly, then zipped his bag. Outside, the sidewalk glittered with sleet. Camden stepped out into the cold, hoodie up, scarf wrapped loose. He wasn't headed toward class. He wasn't headed toward the dining hall. He was walking through campus for the last time, not as a student, but as a force that had moved through it and left it changed. Students passed by, and this time, a few more nodded. A professor jogged up the steps ahead of him and looked back just once. No tension, just familiarity. Even the campus security guard near the east gate gave him a thumbs up and said, "See you on the other side, young man." Camden smiled faintly. Not because he felt accepted, because he felt finished. Not defeated, complete. He took one last detour through the garden path behind the science building, the one where Brent once made sure he overheard that awful joke. That moment used to sting. Now it felt distant, small, like a fossil left behind in the foundation of something stronger. Because Brent, gone. Derek, silent. And Camden, still walking. He reached the campus exit just as the sun began breaking through the gray. The sky split open in slow golden lines. Camden stopped and looked up. For the first time since he arrived at Halberd, he didn't feel like he had to calculate every move, every breath, every blink. He could just be Camden. Not the hoodie, not the file, not the story, just Camden Hill. And that was more than enough. Camden stood at the edge of campus, where the stone archway cast a long shadow over the icy sidewalk. Behind him, Halberd stretched quiet in the dawn light, its towers, its traditions, its trimmed hedges hiding the scars of what had been broken, exposed, and rebuilt. In front of him, the city, the world, whatever came next. He adjusted the strap of his backpack, tugged his hood down tighter, and exhaled. It wasn't nostalgia that held him there a moment longer. It was reverence. Because this was more than a college campus now. It was the place he didn't just survive. It was where he rose. Footsteps approached behind him. Slow, intentional. Camden turned and saw Professor McAllister, coat open, scarf loose, coffee in one hand. For a long moment, they just stood facing each other. No titles, no distance. Just two men who once met in a room full of silence and left it with a lesson neither could fully articulate. "I read your final thesis," McAllister said. Camden tilted his head slightly. "And?" McAllister smiled. Small, real. "You didn't just solve equations. You made them speak." Camden shrugged. "They always do. People just don't like what they're saying." McAllister chuckled. "True," then after a pause. "You changed this place." Camden met his eyes. "So did you," he said. "Eventually. It wasn't praise, it was truth." McAllister nodded once, then extended his hand. Camden shook it, not as student to professor, as man to man. After McAllister left, Camden stood a moment longer beneath the arch. He thought of his mother, how she used to say, "Walk in quiet power, baby. That's what they fear the most." He thought of Bishop, his father, whose silence was steel, whose shadow had stretched far, but never forced Camden to follow it. He thought of every name he'd written in the back of his red notebook, the ones who mocked him, the ones who doubted him, the ones who now walked freer because he hadn't folded. And then, without a word, he walked down the hill, into the street, past the cafe, past the bus stop, through the city's morning breath of traffic and voices and steam rising from grates. He moved like a current, his footsteps steady. He didn't walk like someone escaping. He walked like someone carrying the lessons, the battle, the shift, the silence that had become language. When he reached the train station, he didn't wait in the crowd. He stood back, watched, observed. Old habits. A security guard passed him, gave a nod. "Heading out?" Camden nodded. "Back home?" Camden paused, then shook his head. "Forward." On the train, he sat by the window, watched the buildings blur. He took out his red notebook, edges worn, cover faded, pages stuffed with scribbled notes, clipped articles, quotes from strangers and scholars and friends who didn't even know they were teaching him. He flipped to the last page. Blank. He thought for a moment, then wrote, "The hoodie was never the threat. The hoodie was the mirror." They weren't afraid of me. They were afraid of what they couldn't erase. So I gave them something to remember. He closed the book, tucked it into his bag, leaned back in the seat. Outside the window, the sun rose. Behind him, Halberd stood still. Ahead of him, the story continued, not with headlines and not with proof, but with presence. And if anyone ever asked what happened to the boy in the hoodie, the answer was simple. He walked on. He didn't leave Halberd with fanfare. No marching band, no standing ovation, no glossy feature story in the alumni magazine. But when Camden Hill walked off that campus for the last time, something followed him. Change. Real change. Not the kind you write about once and forget. The kind that lives in policy rewrites, in classrooms that finally open up, in the way professors now pause before assuming silence means ignorance. The kind of change that can't be measured in headlines, but in breathing room. For the next black kid who walks into those halls with a hoodie, a head full of potential, and no need to ask permission. Camden didn't win, he endured. And in a world that's built to exhaust, erase, and exploit minds like his, endurance is a revolution. He left behind no statue, no scholarship in his name, no public legacy, just a notebook full of proof, a hallway full of echoes, and a generation of students who now know that power doesn't always need a microphone. Sometimes it just needs to be seen. So now the question becomes, what do you carry? What systems are you walking through right now? Quietly collecting wounds in places that claim to protect you? What spaces have told you you're lucky just to be present, when really they're lucky to have you? What hoodies have you been asked to remove just to make someone else comfortable? And when you look at your own story, are you still waiting for someone to give you permission to speak? Or will you let your walk do the talking? If Camden's story spoke to something in you, if it reminded you of the pressure, the silence, the fire that's still burning under your breath, then don't let this be the end of the conversation. Subscribe to Silent Power Stories. This channel is more than storytelling. It's a mirror, it's a message, it's a movement. Here, we don't scream, we don't dramatize, we show what power looks like when it's patient, when it's precise, when it's black, unapologetic, and undeniable. Turn on the bell so you never miss a walk like Camden's. Share this story with someone who's carrying their own silence. Comment below what your hoodie is, what the world misunderstands about you before you even speak. And remember, not all battles need fists. Sometimes all it takes is one step, one voice, one refusal to break, one hoodie walking forward. This has been another story from Silent Power Stories, where silence is strength and the walk, it never ends.